is take nominations from the floor for chair, and then we will vote on those nominations depending upon how many people. Well, we'll vote either way. But so right now, I'll open the floor for nominations for chair of this committee.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Logistically, will these committees be held on the same day as they are today, or will they become separate?
That's a good question. That is an answer that maybe the CEO can provide us.
When we poll the board members twice a year, and consistently we get the majority of board members, almost all board members can be available the third Monday. We scheduled these committees back to back today because we have items for the two separate committees. Ideally, we'll only have one, but if we have to, they'll be back to back. But this is the date, the third Monday. I know Commissioner Merman has her conflict with Tampa Bay Water, but other than that, this is a one-day condition as all.
It seems like there's a lot of overlap, in the committees.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yep.
Yeah. What is this committee responsible for? I'm sorry, this committee is.
This committee is primarily responsible for the financial issues related to HART's operations. So you first review the budget, the CAFRA. You approve or get all the additional supplemental information you want with respect to the CAFRA. I think that's the most important thing you do is review and approve the budget.
And I can speak to, I think this is going to continue. I was the chair of the audit committee. If I'm not mistaken, the chair will probably also meet with the auditors. I think it's a couple times a year, go through an interview type of thing, independent, it's just
Those are the primary things, approving the budget, going through the audit function, and then handling financial issues as they arise as the committee that should review that first and make recommendations to the board.
Can I ask you a question too? Because my thoughts for this committee, when I really recommended it, because I feel like I pushed this one pretty hard, because it's generally how boards are organized. They do finance and audit together. They look at the budget. They approve contracts. The approval of different contracts and different things really should come through this committee first. Governance is more about operations, and maybe they could see some financial things that we're approving. They could leave here and go to an operations committee, I guess.
And I also thought your motion included making governance a bit more of an executive committee.
Yes.
That could serve in a substitute capacity for the board in those instances where that was necessary. We are in the process of identifying the policies that define these committees and getting those finalized for the board to take final action. But I believe that was part of the reorganization as well.
Right. My thought is that the committees don't have to meet every single month, but your governance, your quote kind of executive committee needs to meet every single month so that those decisions, you could defer to the executive committee for a decision. The board could say, we will defer, let the executive committee make the final decision on this or something like that. So it's just, I wanted us to be in more of a normal board process as we're going forward, and a governance process as it relates to, I sit on a lot of boards. This has been the quirkiest one, I have to say, because I just couldn't understand the items that it seems like we were approving items in the operations committee when I really felt, and when we're talking about revenues and how much money do we really need for TDP? That should be in your finance committee. We need to discuss, those options for funding and how are we going to raise that money, grants, whatever. So that's kind of what I was thinking.
So it was to dequirkify.
Dequirkify.
I'm not sure.
I like it. No, I think your experience, Commissioner, I think that's great that you brought that to this committee structure so we can be more effective. Absolutely. So
But didn't we just do all those contracts on the other committee?
We did a couple or one. I think that if, as I heard the commissioner just stated, the governance would be more policy and executive decisions, but finance would handle contracts and finance.
It really should.
So
that's how it should work. We've got to stop taking these contracts through like an operations type mode. It needs to be done in finance, where if you're approving a contract, you're looking at the budget and seeing how's it come out of the budget, how does it, how's it get funded, that type of thing.
And for the majority of our contracts, they're included in items which are addressed within the budget process. We rarely bring in, very rare exceptions, does staff bring something that is extra budgetary? Is that a word like decorporified? Did I just make another word up? So it is tied to things which are in the budget, but it's still there. We do end up approving contracts almost monthly because of the nature of the business we go through. So if it is the committee and the board's preference, you will still see this, the finance committee or the governance committee, but for the contract approvals, there will be a few months where we don't have something coming up for contract approval. So that is a consideration. Then the finance committee will be meeting regularly, and you would have a separate governance committee meeting regularly. We can line it up however the committee and the board see fit. If I would like to avoid that we have a governance committee meeting to talk governance options, and then a finance committee doing contracts, and then we have these two committees meeting just like this every month, and we haven't restructured. We just changed the letterhead and dragged twice the number of people coming in.
You don't want to balkanize the decision making
do
to
that.
the point where you have multiple committees
Right.
before it even gets to the board. But I think what I'm hearing is you want to have the finance primarily oriented towards finance, but with the governance committee, which will meet more often, able to approve certain contracts that are consistent with their approved budget and move forward to the board. All right.
And they can also, governance as an executive committee, you could discuss human relationship, HR. You can discuss a multitude of other issues that come up. Any of these other that we have at the end of the agenda, I guess I don't have another agenda here, but some of those other things that are involved with your operations that need to rise to an executive level.
Okay.
Question. As I understand the conversation here, we have already approved some contracts to go to the Joan board. With this committee, would we move forward from, at what point would we start? Because we've already passed some budgetary, some contracts or stuff. When would we start? How would it affect the budget that we are establishing? In other words, when we're doing the budget, would this committee meet and look at how you're budgeting things for the following year that be included in the budget? Would we, after the budget has been approved, when these things come up, would we meet to determine the financial?
If I can respond to your question, I think what I've heard in the past and the action the board took when it structured these committees is that primary responsibility for those financial decisions will be the finance committee. However, you will also allow the governance committee to have that authority in those instances in which the finance committee is not meeting, so long as it is clearly a contract consistent with the budget. So that we'll have a little overlap, but you don't necessarily have to go through both committees every time. When finance approves it, it goes to the board. When governance approves it, it goes to the board. So you don't have committee, board. But you can have a little bit of overlap because the finance committee is not going to meet 12 times a year.
Correct.
I think that's what I'm hearing and what I recall from the conversation.
Yeah, so my understanding of, like just for today, for instance, so my understanding of what we did today in the governance committee was that we approved contracts. We approved contracts, and a couple of them had some financial considerations that were vetted previously, I guess, by this committee in terms of these projects fit into the budget. We went through the procurement process. We made a selection, and then our responsibility of the governance committee was to say, yes, we're ratifying that selection as the group that we want to do that takes this project forward, and that was our responsibility. So I didn't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't think today I was approving the amount of the contract in terms of how it fits in the budget, but rather we were approving the moving forward of a project that's already been vetted through the budget process. It's accepted into the budget, and we made a selection on how to move that forward and say, yes, we want this project to move forward. Is that kind of where you were trying to get at with it, Commissioner?
I think so. It's just that you've got to take the financial decisions the governance committee is really kind of like Catherine's right arm to look at the agenda. Here's how the agenda is going to look for the meeting. possibly having to make decisions if you need to. The finance committee should be approving the contracts. Those are financial decisions that need to be made in that. So I guess I didn't really understand. Today, if you had governance before this, probably that was a little quirky. I'm back to quirk. Because really finance should meet before governance. Governance is like an executive committee that Catherine can use as her sounding board for the agenda.
I just have to say, as a person in the business world, this small committee of HART has way too many subcommittees. Just
Way
my
too many.
observation. But to the extent that I've never been on a finance committee meeting. So do we meet? Does it meet regularly? If it has, I've never been at one, and I don't know.
No, this is the beginning.
This is the first meeting. Okay, well that's important to establish. Because I was like, because then I feel like I come to the board meeting and all I'm doing is listening to the same. I mean, it's just I don't know. I haven't gotten my rhythm yet of all these meetings and then the other meeting but I think that if you're going to have a finance and audit committee, anything dealing with the budget should be in the finance committee agenda. So it seems like the governance committee agenda this morning was not clear. And it would go from the finance committee to the board, not from the finance committee to the governance committee, which is what I think you were saying, and then to the board. Oh my God,
No,
then
that's
shoot
too
me
much.
now. That would
That's
be
too
like
much.
4 times we're going to hear it. No, we would just go from the finance committee to the board, and the governance committee then would deal with maybe other issues, such as HR, such as operations, such as
Routes, fair, anything, like all these presentations you have that come in front of the board, I don't know if you vet those out through any group the executive committee can help you with some of that.
Quick question. What was the incentive of how often would the Finance and Governance Committee meet? Has that been established?
No, it hasn't. And part of this conversation is an elaboration of the board discussion 6 months ago, whatever it was. So I think what we need to do, if the finance committee is not going to meet 12 times a year, you need to at least have the possibility that in the absence of a finance committee meeting, the executive committee or governance committee can take financial action. So as long as it's consistent with the budget that's been vetted through finance.
Right. On those, as an example, Catherine brought up a great point. The routine, maybe routine's not the right word, but regularly recurring monthly contracts that just are part of doing business that need to be approved and can't wait.
And per our procurement policy, recurring purchases are not things that the board come up to the board like fuel. There is an annual authorization for how we're processing it. We've budgeted the fuel, but then every month when we purchase fuel, it's a regular recurring purchase. It does not come up to the committee meeting. But looking at the actions that were approved, it was repairs to the bus wash. It was the stormwater runoff study, and then also the approval for the DRI-based wiregrass consolidation of service. All of these are things which have been approved through the budget. These are projects which have all been shared with the board in various iterations. So we can divide them that either they're consolidated coming down to executive committee. With the size of our procurement staff, it works best for us to have these things coming in consistently. It does not work for us to have them coming in a slug. But let us brainstorm on some ways to do this.
What's your do you have a spending authority limit?
We have them, and I'm going to refer over to Al and to Jeff. For me individually, it's under $100,000. So anything over that comes to you, but also things which are certain things under $100,000 that have to go through the procurement process, like the lobbying contracts are under $100,000, but we go through the committee award and they come back. Because of the level of interest the board has shown, we bring it back to the board. And Al, do you want to add anything to the different levels of purchasing, or Jeff?
Generally for an organization this size, like at the port, the spending authority is like at around $250,000. So, but I don't know. We may not feel comfortable with doing that.
Ours is $100,000.
Can I ask another question? So I'm lost in the committee meeting. So governance meets how often? Once a month?
Everything meets once a month.
So, well, finance, if this is the first meeting we've ever had at this group, then we don't meet once a month. So,
Right.
so
We
why
just
wouldn't we
started.
just have the finance meeting replace the governance meeting? And the governance meeting would be more at random versus
Yes,
the finance meeting.
that's correct.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what it seems like. That would be more in sync with what you need, and at least if that's what was perceived as the idea of what's going to be in the finance committee. So in that case, I would nominate you, Mr. Melendez, to be chairman.
Yes,
So you're chairman
I'll
of
second
both.
that.
And you
And
would then
close my
have enough
nomination.
sense to know when you need to call a governance meeting, but that would be less routine than the finance and audit. And that's what I'm just, that's my only way I can weed through what we're talking about.
So, in other words, decisions, like some we made this morning that have a contract that has some kind of financial implication to the budget, that goes to the finance committee because it does have a dollar value to it. So when you're meeting monthly, the finance committee is making determinations that, okay, decisions we're making on contracts that are with the budget, fit within the budget, we recommend this. And the finance committee has their finger on the pulse of the budget, on what's going on, in all those things that revolve around any financial consideration for the organization. So it makes more sense, and I think, seeing where you're going
I
with
mean,
this,
it's just
to do
that
it that way.
our whole thing, our whole job here as a board is really to maintain the financial condition, good operations for HART. We have discussed ad nauseum about funding. And if that's important, then we need to have a finance committee that's going to really put the pencil to paper and look through the budget, help Catherine prioritize, and get what needs to be done. Routes, funding, shifts, whatever needs to get done. Advocating for more funding. You know, all those type of issues. I've thought that since I've been on this board, I thought there needed to be a pure finance and audit committee.
I think it's a great, I remember the conversation, and I think it's very timely, especially anticipating the new money that we will get when the voters of the Hillsborough County vote on whatever gets presented before them, that there will be an important role that you come from the Finance Committee in terms of prioritization, allocation, because there'll be a lot more, less routine, more opportunity, you would hope.
Right.
As the scrivener of this process we're describing, I think what I've now heard is that the finance committee should meet monthly. The
Yes.
governance committee can meet a little more sporadically. My other question, though, is typically I believe those committee meetings are either called by the chair of the whole board, not the chair of the finance committee. So, or they're set based upon perceived needs by professional staff. So when I draft it, why don't I do it that way? And the chair of this committee can always request that a governance committee meeting be held. So, all right, I think there's going to be a little overlapping of authority, but I think it'll allow us to be more efficient. Okay. That having been said, I think we have a nomination for the chair of the committee. Was there a second?
I did second.
Okay, there's a first and a second. Any further nominations?
Question.
Yes, sir.
I was asked to stay today, but I don't see my name as a committee member. Am I allowed to vote on this?
Ooh, if you're not a committee member, that would be no.
Okay, just
Unless you've been appointed by
Can
the
we
chair.
swear
as a
them
sub-
in real fast?
I just wanted to make sure.
Let's see, our finance committee, we got even a quorum. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, we have a quorum. No, actually, you're not on the committee, but we can talk to the chair about possibly putting you on if that's something you wish to do.
I gotta be nice to him.
Yes, ma'am.
No, I just want to make sure because name and
You can vote, it just won't count.
okay. That's like me.
Yes, ma'am.
I was on that subcommittee when we discussed changing them, and one of the considerations that we had was that the chair of each committee would also serve on the executive committee. Would that put us, by having the chair of two committees, would the vice chair then go to that executive committee, or would we just have a even number of?
I will have to look back at the minutes of those meetings to refresh my recollection, because I remember we had multiple discussions. There was also
Yeah.
discussions about having certain representatives, county representative, electeds, et cetera. So let me go refresh my recollection with those minutes. We've got to get those policies prepared so that we can get them back to the board and the whole board can finalize this structure.
Yeah.
But you're right, there was a lot of discussion about how the executive committee would be comprised, and we need to make sure the policies reflect what the board decided, so we'll do that. Hearing no further questions, I believe we have a nomination on the floor and a second. There's no further nominations. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Unanimous. We now have a chairman. And you can do the election of the vice chairman. I'll do it if you want.
Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Okay, well, let's see, we need the vice chair, so we have a nomination for vice chair of the Finance and Audit Committee.
I nominate Kathleen.
Second.
Second.
Okay, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, motion carries. Right, my first action is new chair. All right. Okay, well, with that, let's see, we have, I think we've handled everything. Is that all the business we needed to handle? Let's see, and next on the agenda is public comment on the agenda items. 3 minutes per speaker. Is anyone signed up to speak, or do we have anyone from the public that wishes to speak at this time? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Next, we have a presentation by Mr. Andrew Laughlin from Clifton Allen Larson. Or Larson Allen, excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Laughlin.
Morning, committee members, and welcome. Just a couple seconds for those.
And while they're doing that, everyone, we have a hard copy of the CAFR and the presentation on your tablets. So.
But I played baseball. This was the kind of
Actually, while they're doing that, forgive me, we did not do the Pledge of Allegiance before this committee. We did it earlier, but we reconvened. We need to do it again. So, everyone would stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Are we ready?
a lot of technology when it works, you know.
When does it work?
I heard that.
Recording.
Really?
How big was the best you had?
Apparently not big enough.
All right. I've already learned something in this presentation. Don't touch that button.
Don't touch anything.
I'm going to get the presentation on. Well, welcome, audit committee members. My name is Andrew Laughlin. I'm a principal with the audit firm Clifton Larson Allen. I lead our state and local government practice here in the Tampa Bay area, and we are the auditors for the authority. Here's my audit team. Besides me, we have basically a single audit compliance team, and we also have a financial statement audit team. So kind of differing responsibilities, but all getting to the same end result. So we had Roxanne Acosta, Engagement Director, and Ray Bustler as our single audit engagement team. And then on the financial statement side, we had Sue Pagan, Kim Pobletti, and Steve Smith heading up that group. And then we also do another compliance audit, which is on the National Transit Database, NTD, where we have to issue an agreed-upon procedures report. So I led that group along with Stephen Smith. So it's been a very interesting, crazy year, one could say, for local governments in the state of Florida for their accounting, financial reporting, and auditing. Usually I come up to you all about 3 months earlier. I think usually it's around maybe early to mid-February time frame. So here we are in mid-May, and I'm coming to you all presenting the CAFR. So the point of my presentation is that we're presenting the comprehensive annual financial report in draft form. The audit is essentially complete, near final, and one of the main things that is to get done to finalize this will be your approval of this document upon your review, and feel free to ask any questions along the way throughout the presentation. But I'm going to give you all a chance to review the CAFR document, listen to this presentation, where I'm going to give you some financial highlights, talk about any compliance-related or internal control issues we might have encountered throughout the course of the audit, and give you all plenty of opportunity for feedback, questions, comments. So, like I said, it's been a huge delay this year. Usually we're around the February timeframe, finishing this thing up. Now here we are in mid-May, and I'm already joking with finance that within a matter of weeks we got to schedule the entrance conference for next year's audit. Be that as it may, there was one major factor that caused that, and that's thanks to our standard-setting machines over at the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They has all adopted GASB 67, 68, and 71, which is the new pension standard. So we now have this big, massive pension liability on the authority's books. I'm going to get into that in a future slide. But thanks to our standard-setting machines at GASB, plus thanks to our friends over at the Florida Retirement System, of which all authority employees participate in, they suffered a significant delay in getting us and other participating employers the needed information to implement this standard and insert all the financial statement balances and disclosures into this CAFR. So that was the big cost for the delay. It was outside of the control of both the auditor and finance. It was basically out of our control. But all Florida governments that participated in Florida Retirement System are suffering the same ordeal. So real quick, there's nothing really different here. So we didn't have to issue any new reports or do anything different in terms of our reporting requirements from an auditor's perspective. We've got our financial statements, federal compliance, state compliance reports. Those are all the same. These are the reports that we delivered, same as last year. You've got 1 through 6. 6, that was new last year. That was the independent accountants report. That was on investment compliance. The Florida Auditor General made all auditors in the state of Florida issue this new examination report attesting on whether or not the entity complied with Section 218.415 Florida statutes, which is on whether or not you really followed your investment policy. So this is the second year in action of this report. Everything else has been pretty standard fare for a number of years. So let's just go through the auditor's procedures real quick. On the independent audit report on modified opinions, that's good. No modifications to our opinion. We did have an emphasis of a matter, which is just the implementation of this new pension standard, which I'll get to momentarily. Great news on this front. We had on the internal auditor's report on internal control, so where we report any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control, we had none to report, so that's great news. More great news on the single audit side. We had an unmodified opinion on compliance, no material weaknesses that were reported, no material question cost findings or question costs in that schedule that we report on. We audited 1 major federal program and 2 major state projects, so all was good on the single audit end as well.
And Andrew, let me interrupt. I believe Jeff can confirm this is the first time in 10 years we've had no findings, no weaknesses. So this is the agency's strongest audit in 10 years.
Congratulations.
A great statement, and if our PI over at Ed should be writing the press release right now, but we will be pushing this out now. And at the board meeting, this is a great accomplishment, especially as we are working on showing we are a good investment and we can be trusted with taxpayer dollars. We're very proud of this achievement. And personally, thank you, finance staff. You can't shorten those 12-hour days and go home just yet. But thank you for all the work on this, really from the entire team.
I echo those sentiments. So, in the management letter, if we had any recommendations to improve financial management, maybe do things a bit more efficiently or a bit better, they don't rise to the level of a material weakness or significant deficiency in internal control where, oh my God, something's really wrong. So we just had one recommendation to that end. That was on pay rate modifications, and that there's a system limitation within Great Plains where members of payroll staff need to have access to modified pay rate changes. Even though they don't do that, HR handles that function. But if that function was removed from them, then that would eliminate other functions that they do need within Great Plains to administer payroll. So with that, we were discussing with finance and IT what we can do to try to remedy that. So what we've done is now on a periodic basis, IT staff will monitor a rate change report to see who has modified pay rates in the last 60, 90 days, and if there's anything that looks funny or potentially unauthorized, because that should only come from HR, then appropriate steps will be taken to investigate that. So that's a new control that's now added as a result of our procedures and inquiries that will help strengthen that control around potentially making unauthorized pay rate changes. Then we also, I mentioned, have our independent accountants report, and we have an unmodified attestation opinion on investment compliance. So we looked at the authority's investment policy and made sure that they were in compliance with each aspect, the educational requirement, reporting requirement, and then looking at their actual portfolio, making sure they were within their concentrations, any interest rate maturity limitations. We looked at all of that and made sure they were in compliance. So we did have some prior findings, and more good news here, they've all been resolved. So on one end, we had the year-end financial closing procedures. This had to do with the need for better communication between finance and legal for any potential contingent liabilities that might be out there, so that finance has now integrated them in the financial closing process and are having discussions with them to ensure if there's any potential pending or threatened litigation that may not be otherwise covered under the general liability and workers' comp cases that gets fed to the actuary to develop that claim liability estimate. Anything outside of that, they're discussing with the legal team to make sure that they're appropriately booking in the financial statements if such a liability exists. So that's getting done now. Then these next ones, we've got a cost allocation plan, cost inputs, we've got matching requirements, cost allocation process, and then even from in the prior year review of route cost calculations. Those were findings that we had from our single audit procedures. And management was extremely proactive in trying to get these findings addressed as soon as possible, as soon as we issued them. So kudos to them. We met with them last summer, in the summer of 2015, to say, all right, what can we do to address these? And as we met collectively, a new spreadsheet was created that basically captures all the operating expense data of the authority that's grant-related, pulls out any potential unallowable costs that the federal and state grants won't let you apply for reimbursement for, input matching contributions from other revenue sources of the authority, and then had actual cost data rather than budget data that they can then submit for reimbursement. So this spreadsheet was created by management, reviewed by us, the auditor, gave it the thumbs up, and now we've got this new process in place. So it has remediated all these single audit findings. So we're in good shape now on the single audit compliance and moving forward with the implementation of this new operating cost data worksheet. So just to give you some audit procedures that we performed, some highlights, it's a financial statement audit. I'm not going to get into the basis of how we test cash and inventory and analytical procedures on expenses. Just want to maybe give you some things that you might not think that we do, but we do take a look at. We take a good, strong, hard look at internal controls. So don't think just because we didn't have any findings this year, that doesn't mean we were trying to actually test those controls and evaluate each and every key significant transaction process of the authority. So here we just have a listing of all the aspects of the authority that we take a look at: cash investments, inventories, revenues, receipts, payroll, AP disbursements, cap assets, their self-insured claims process, and then their financial closing reporting process. So we took a look at all of those, evaluated key controls, and assessed them for proper design and implementation. And like I mentioned, we also do a single audit that tests compliance and internal control over compliance on those major federal program state projects that we test. And we also do some non-traditional audit procedures. So here we have our core audit team that has a typical CPA financial statement background, but we also bring in a member of our ISSG team. That's our Information Security Services group. They do basically a network, assess the general computer controls and application controls of the entity and assess if there's any potential vulnerabilities within the network, weak passwords, unauthorized admin access that should be handled differently. So we look at a wider array of things on the IT security end and present a report with our findings. So one thing that we did find that the authority is in the process of undergoing a large core IT infrastructure upgrade with all the Cisco equipment. That's projected to be done Q1 17, I believe, so at the end of this calendar year. After that, we're making suggestions that we can come in and do an external penetration test. So really what that does is we have a team of ethical hackers that can come in and actually try to hack the system of the authority. And so see how far we can get, how much information that we can obtain.
Ethical.
Notice how I said ethical, so we're not going to do anything illegal, we're not going to pull money out of your account and then fly off to the Caribbean. So we recommended having that performed to see if there are any weaknesses within the network. Make sure all the intrusion detection system software is in place, proper firewalls, that they're not only in place, but properly implemented and actually functioning as intended.
Just a quick question, and that was part of this audit process?
We do that every year. We bring our ISSG team member on board to do that review on an annual basis. We present our findings and recommendations to management, and we've already had a separate meeting with management to discuss those recommendations and an action plan going forward. The other thing is on the self-insured medical side, we actually have a licensed pharmacist within our firm that's on a part of our audit team, and they look at we propose looking at the pharmacy benefit manager, these claim costs, to ensure that they're administered in accordance with contractual obligations and that there's a proper application of all pricing elements, so that the authority is using its proper discounts and negotiated discounts, and you're not basically getting overcharged on claims. And I'm going to present in just the next couple of minutes. Self-insured medical claim costs had a real spike in FY 2015, so we want to take a good look at that and make sure the authorities are doing everything they can internally to manage those claim costs. And so
we have a big problem with this at the county. We had another $6 million increase this year, and a lot of it's coming from spousal coverage and prescription drugs. And we're going to have to start taking a look at it. I mean, we just went into a new plan, and then all of a sudden our costs have increased like almost $10 million over the last 2 years, and you got to get control of it. So do we do full spousal coverage?
We do. And to your point, Commissioner, last year we saw a big increase in claims coming from the spouses. And the anecdote is spouses who previously had whatever that job, because that was the only way they could get coverage with pre-existing conditions, now had the option to choose between that whatever I can get job and our benefits. And just like most of our public entities, we saw more spouses coming over with more expensive claims. Last year, we also saw a big increase in our prescription drug coverage. Medication was about 25% of our spend last year. In that, 20% was name brand, and that name brand constituted 80% of the money we put out there. So 2 areas for us to really focus on. And you may recall that we talked a little last year at board's direction, but also internal overhaul. Under the previous CEO, the decision was not to touch the benefit spend breakdown for staff, which ended up giving us a program that was 18% employee, 82% agency. So we just kept incurring more and more cost. We worked very closely with staff last year and had very honest conversations that we are a bus agency, we're a transit agency, and if we have to choose between a bus route and benefits, we have failed. So getting buy-in from staff, we made a shift over to 27% of the cost is on employees now, 73% back on the agency. We added a couple of plans. We broke out employee plus spouse from employee plus child, and that has a more expensive premium than employee plus child, because even when my kid falls and cracks his head, he's still cheaper than other things that you would see coming from a spousal benefit. We added another health reimbursement account option that a lot of our staff has taken advantage of. In the first year, over a sixth of our staff enrollment in this, so the first 500 is covered. There's a larger deductible. We only had one employee last year who signed up for this plan by accident and had a big financial hit to himself. What we've seen this year is we're trending at 52% of budget 6 months in, and why that is significant. Our budget includes, it's calendar for benefits, but fiscal year for the budget. So we're absorbing the last quarter of last year's much richer benefit plan plus a tail claims. And then this first quarter of the year, where traditionally we see a bump up because folks get their FSA and they start spending it. So usually we overspend more than 50% in the first quarter and first half of the year. We're right at 52%. So long answer, we do look at those things. We put in mitigation strategies. Knocking on, I hope it's solid. So far, we're tracking well, but as we're designing the plans for next year, we're looking at continued focus on getting spouses to participate in wellness, to qualify for the buy-it plans, for instance, and the discounts, and we're keeping a very close eye on how the benefits are being consumed and how can we encourage our folks to make choices now that 4 years from now we're not paying for it.
Okay, so we do our own health insurance here, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I think I think you need to start looking outside, thinking outside the box, and possibly looking at, because the county, I think the city and the county both contract out their health. I mean, we have, I don't know, in the school board, different companies, Cigna, there's several big ones
And
here.
Cigna's
but
our broker, yes.
I would like to see a comparison of the cost of how we're operating our health plan now versus if we would contract out the services. It may be that we're doing things and we're being very efficient, but I think it would be worth it for us to see. And what the trends are in the market, that's the one thing. Like, we have a consultant on hand that works totally on our health plan, and he keeps an eye on every single cost. Every driver, of cost to our healthcare plan. So I think that it might be.
But these guys are self-insured. The county's not self-insured.
No.
So they're tracking it probably a lot closer than you think they are. Because I went over this last year with them just from my perspective as a private citizen and what I've seen and we've had to do in the private sector in terms of, everybody's assumption of 80-20 is now really 70-30, shifting to 60-40,
Right.
shifting 50-50. And this is going to be an issue for the public sector entities from a funding perspective, to your
Definitely.
earlier point, that you all are going to have to look at. I do have to say the private sector market is there, way there, because of the cost. And if you're self-insured, I mean, when I met with Catherine and Jeff last year, and they instituted all this wellness and education and the segmentation of the new categories and the shift, now there might have to be another shift in a couple of years, but if they can manage the costs, I think they're on the right path.
Well, we introduced wellness too, and our costs still go up $6 million.
Yeah, but you haven't
So,
shifted. I bet you're an 80-20.
I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but I think you need to think outside the box and look at all the options that are out there, because especially the trends in spousal coverage now is going more towards copay. A lot, where we don't give full 100% coverage to spouse, especially if they're working or maybe they're cherry picking. His plan isn't as rich as your plan, and that type of thing. And I think this is one area where you can literally control your costs completely, and I think we should take a look at it. So I don't want to be a dead horse here, but I think it's something to take a look at.
We'll tee it up for a finance committee update.
Definitely. That's why we have that.
There we
And
go.
now we're getting
Yes,
into
ma'am.
the meat
Well, we
of the subject.
And we shifted to self-insurance. I want to say in 8, 9, and 10, we overpaid to Cigna in premiums about $500,000 a year. So one of the things with the team for fiscal 11 was to move to self-insurance. We do a review every year looking at what was our claims experience, what's comparable for the market, what are the Affordable Care Act fees that we're paying self-insured versus not. And thus far, the math has come back and said we are still making a good choice, but we'll bring that back to the committee so we can have the bigger conversation and also dig into what else have we looked at to be comparable. We included a review of benefits in our classification and compensation study that had recently wrapped, and it turned out that even at the new split, our benefits were still they were still above 100% of the standard. So it gives us the opportunity to say, do we keep it there? Do we pay what we pay on our contract, given that we might have better benefits? What is the split as far as retaining staff? Do we get to the point that our benefits package is attractive enough that fewer people are quitting, and so it's justifying some other costs for us? But we'll bring out an update for the next committee. But we do work very closely with our various actuarials, and Dara hears me constantly asking for what's this. So we are with Gallagher constantly to say, okay, have we mitigated folks going to emergency rooms when they should have gone to urgent care, and anecdotally.
And actually now, even kids, because I'm on the board of Florida Healthy Kids, I mean, you can get coverage now on Florida Kid Care. You have to, paying coverage. You can pay for coverage under Florida Kid Care as your insurance for your kids. And it's really, really not totally inexpensive, but it's very cost effective.
And we'll bring an update.
Yeah,
If I may, if I just may.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So my question would be, since you have right here this wonderful bullet point that says self-insured medical PBM claims assessment, how does our information fit into what you're doing and what kind of information can you provide to us, getting you back on track with your presentation, obviously? But how do you help this discussion? I mean, what kind of things can you provide to us?
Well, I mean, at the moment I don't have any information to share about the results of the assessment in the very preliminary stages, but that's the whole point, is to say, all right, let's look at what your contract is, and it's amazing the potential error rate that is out there involving negotiated discounts that are in place, but they just get miscoded, misbilled, and not taking advantage of those discounts that are in the contract, because the pharmacy benefit manager, the PBM, isn't exactly incentivized to ensure that you're paying the actual absolute lowest cost. So that's the whole point of this, is just to have an independent third party who has the knowledge and wherewithal, with his background as a pharmacist, take a look at this stuff and see if there's something worth investigating further. So,
if I can just one more point to that, because I think it's a good point. Your results are independent of, say, comparisons to other methods, but I think we can take the results of this year's of the CAFR, and as we continue the dialogue, look at how other audit results come out with other methods. Is it more favorable, with self-insured? Anyways, just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure. Okay. All right, so getting into the most fun topic here today is the implementation of GASB 68 amended by 71 and what that means to the authority. At the end of the day, you'll see in the very last sentence is that now the authority has recognized a new liability for September 30, 2015, totaling about $23 million. So, I guess to borrow a term from Chairman Melendez, let me try to dequirkify any preconceived notions out there. It's really, what does that mean? So, I guess let me start and help you understand the plan. We'll talk a little bit about what was going on and what is now going on in this wonderful world of GASB and pension implementation. So, all the authority's employees were members of the Florida Retirement System, which is a cost-sharing multi-employer plan, which a number of many Florida local governments participate in. Well, the extent of the obligation to the authority under that plan has always been, per employee, there's a percentage of their compensation that needs to get remitted as a contribution to FRS. So you take your population, depending on what kind of plan they're in, whether they're a traditional pension plan, investment plan, drop, senior management class, whatever type they're in, get that percentage, you send in your payment to FRS on a monthly basis. That hasn't changed. So from a cash flow perspective, there's really no difference. The only difference is how the accounting gods now foresee this thing is where does this liability really exist? Does it exist just within the plan within FRS, or does that liability need to be sprinkled amongst all the participating employers? So how do we recognize this $23 million liability? I'll try to explain it like so. You have an actuarially determined total pension liability amount. What the actuary says, all right, if we cut this plan off today, you've got all the retirees in the plan, you've got all active members that have vested benefits in the plan. They're going to live out their careers and their lives, and eventually everyone's going to die off. Sorry to sound morbid, but what is the actual total liability over time that we need to pay out all these benefits to both existing retirees, spouses, beneficiaries, active employees, etc. Then you have what's called fiduciary net position. That's the actual assets, investable assets that the plan has thanks to all our participating government's contributions. Well, total pension liability minus fiduciary net position gives you net pension liability. That number in totality, there's actually two plans here, the FRS traditional plan, and then there's this health insurance subsidy that you can get up to $150 a month to help as a retiree pay your health insurance premiums. So essentially two plans, you combine those, you have a $23 billion shortfall, meaning your total pension liability exceeds fiduciary net position by $23 billion. That's with a B, not an M. So then you take that $23 billion liability, and now that's got to get disseminated among all the participating employers, including the authority. So how do they do that? Strictly based on the amount of contributions that you contribute in relation to your peer group, the other participating employers. And HART has this very tiny percentage, but you multiply that by 23 billion, here's the number you're left with, 23,122,094. So does this set off alarms like, oh my God, how are we going to pay this $23 million next year? We better raise the millage rate. Panic. Absolutely not. This is a paper liability. Can be no cash flow output over time. Now, if the plan was to completely implode, and mind you, FRS is a well-funded plan, so I don't foresee any time in the near future where the plan is going to cease and we're going to have some major liability that's coming due. If the plan just continues to operate as normal, all you're going to incur from a cash flow perspective is those same contributions you have to make to FRS. So nothing to be really concerned about. Sure, it's a balance sheet hit. It looks a little crazy. I'm going to show you the net position over the last 4 years, and you're going to see net position going into a negative number, and this is why. But as I tell all my local government clients, this is nothing to be supremely concerned about. It's just putting the awareness out there that, yes, we have this obligation over time for the employees that we have working for us that are in the Florida retirement system. That's my spiel. Any questions on that?
It's like too big to ask a question.
Scared about the
You want to know the county liability?
Just one quick overview question. Statewide, the city and public agencies have a $23 billion liability.
Yep.
This just says what our amount of that is.
What your share is, yep.
Right, our
Exactly
shares.
what you're taking.
As Seminole County has theirs, so on and so forth, everybody around.
As long as you're participating in FRS, it's called the proportionate share. It's a pretty easy calculation. It's your contribution versus the total, divide the two numbers, and that's the piece of the pie that you get attributed to you.
Can I ask
Quick
a question? And this may be a hard question. I know we have reserves. Is this where we have reserves for our pension? No? Okay.
This isn't even
Don't take my
money.
answer.
Okay, so if something were catastrophic to happen and everybody retired at once, then that's really the only circumstance where this would be a situation, and that's not anything.
Right, that this would be the doomsday scenario. As all of a sudden there's just mass retirements. But if that's the case, I'm sure there's other factors that contribute to that we probably have to worry about more than paying out pensions. So,
would it be prudent, in your opinion, that we do establish some kind of minimum reserve fund for pensions to build up, or is that common practice, or?
I haven't heard of other local governments that are trying to build up reserves to pay this out because it's just on a pay-as-you-go basis. Always has been, and in the foreseeable future, it always will be. Unless you're strapped for cash and are having trouble making your FRS payments, I don't foresee a need to try to build up a huge reserve for this $23 million number.
Okay, so this number represents the difference of what we have in FRS and what our liability would be
Right.
over time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's the net present value of that number? You know, what's the real number?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of today.
Right.
That's okay. This is one of these, I think it's a good exercise. I know what Yancey's going at because I think it's about, there are a lot of cities and counties in it that are highly, suspect, and then that number is like a lot more. And so I think it's a matter of how it's weighted. And I do think there should be some comparison chart we should look at from a perspective of other agencies, like-sized agencies, from a vulnerability, to Karen's point, with knowledge in terms of what is the liability. But I don't think creating a fund is not it. It's about giving less people less money because the unfunded liability in this country is what's going to cause the next economic downturn, in my humble opinion. And this is a perfect example of what Cass was trying to get at.
And is this further into the audit? I looked at, I believe it was the FRS assumed rate of return of 7.65%. Is that the going rate? Or, in your opinion, is that suspect?
Not to get too technical, but that's it's what's called the projected investment earnings by the actuaries based on that assumed rate of return. Then you have actual investment earnings, the difference of which either if projected is lower than actual, that's good, that means we've earned more than we thought, or the opposite could be true. Well, then that difference gets amortized out over time because we don't want, the creators of the standard did not want any local government to take a huge hit to the P&L in 1 year That's why they set up what's known as these deferred inflows and outflows of resources. And if you look at your statement of net position, you'll see that the authority has it deferred outflows of resources, pension-related amounts, deferred inflows of resources, pension-related amounts. And what that is meant to do is to amortize out pension expense, either increases to pension expense or decreases to pension expense as a result of things like that. Huge upswings in the market where your earnings are way better than projected, or the opposite to be true. Let's amortize that difference out over a 5-year period. Same thing with assumptions. So you have a change of assumption in life expectancy and mortality that could take a huge hit on the total liability amount, for the better or for the worse. So those kind of things they like to smooth out over time, and that's why you have these new financial statement classifications, deferred inflows and outflows. One other thing I'll just address, I guess, is the net present value question. The closest I can come to explaining that, you'll see there is a net pension liability amount that's due in 1 year, so the actual current portion of that. So you might be wondering, well, if this is really just a paper liability, is there truly a current portion to be paying out? Well, the GASB rule says if you've got projected benefit payments of just the next year, which the actuary projects over the next 5 years what the benefit payments are going to be in each plan. And if you have your fiduciary net position, it doesn't even cover next year's projected payments, then you have a shortfall there just for that next year. We don't have that in the defined traditional FRS plan, but we do have that in the health insurance subsidy because that's a pay-as-you-go plan. Remember, the health insurance subsidy is every year you work, you get $5 added to your subsidy to pay retiree health costs up to $150 a month, I believe is the benefit. So that doesn't really get actively funded. So there's a very small fiduciary net position in that. So your projected payments next year are higher. So that shortfall is what's recognized times our proportionate share is what that current portion is of the liability.
And just one kind of final statement, real quick, Karen, regarding your comment about a potential fund to hedge against this. For me, it's really our approach to finances that is really our hedge. When Jeff gives us presentations and we see in those out years, we see black, in the current year and then the near years. It really is our approach to finances and the issues. And I think that's our first defense, and staff doing a great job of having the first time ever of no material weaknesses, those risks. I'm happy to be familiar with work with what's happening in Michigan. Detroit declared bankruptcy a couple years ago. I learned that Detroit wasn't the only city that happened to. It's just like this kind of ripple effect around it. There were some areas in Alabama where they overcommitted. So I just wanted to make that point that it's our approach and our financial decisions that are our best defense against this liability. So,
Yeah, you make a great point. That's pretty much the reason why it came about, is to kind of shed light and have some eyes open as to what the potential liability really is out there on a long-term basis, because it's always just been under a current funding mechanism. What's our required contribution this year, and what did we make in relation to what the actuary said we had to make? Well, that liability builds up over time, and that's really what this is set to do. But rest assured, the FRS is a well-funded plan in relation to other state retirement systems. All right, just to give some quick financial statement analysis, I haven't really made an auditor presentation this long before, so you might be itching for me to get done here.
I'm going to check
We're
that out
hungry
first
for
finance.
information.
We'll keep you moving in.
There we go. All I did is just give you kind of a 4-year trend here, so you can see in terms of assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses, what was the direction that the authority was taking. Are we seeing a huge uptick in revenues, or a huge downswing in revenues or expenses? Is it going a certain way? Is there something we should be concerned about? So I just gave you a 4-year trend analysis here. You just see a little bit lower in cash equivalents and investments. A lot has to do with increased personnel costs, in which those medical claim costs we talked about. Inventory is consistent year to year. Capital assets net consistent year to year. You will see some year-to-year fluctuations on cap asset additions, and that really has to do with the amount of bus purchases, revenue vehicles, bus pad shelters that are getting constructed in a given year. So more bus purchases in a year, you're going to see higher capital asset additions. And 2013 is when they had a whole lot. Then on the liability side, consistency amongst your current accounts payable, accrued expenses, your self-insurance loss contingencies, that's been increasing year to year, but like I said, the actual claim payments have been going up steadily from year to year. I've got some quick data to share for you. This is actual claims payments made by the authority in 2012. It was 4.3 million. Then 2013, 5.7 million. 2014, it was 7 million. Then 2015, it was 9.1 million. So steadily increasing year to year. And how much so of the self-insured claims liability? And I asked, okay, well, what is the authority self-insured in? It's basically general liability, which they do have some protection under Florida sovereign immunity laws, $200,000 per person, $300,000 per occurrence. We've also got self-insured for workers' compensation claims, although there is an excess coverage that they do have on workers' comp. And so those are the two main. And then you've got your medical claims coverage. There's also a property insurance that they do have that's a $25K deductible per occurrence. On the medical side, they do have stop loss coverage up to $150,000. So that's what we're self-insured for collectively. These costs have been rising, and of those 4 years of data that I gave you, well, how much does medical relate to those claim costs? It was 63% in 2012. That was the first year that they went self-insured for medical. Then 71%, then 72%, and then in 2015, 79% of those claim payments were medical related. So a big chunk of that is on the medical side. On the environmental remediation, pretty consistent, but you'll see it pretty long, no disclosure about it. Just to give you a heads up, HART contracted with Nova Engineering Environmental. It's up to a 5-year contract with $1.7 million. Yet the liability here is only $119,000. So why the disparity? Well, really, there's some initial site assessment and preparation, investigation work, and taking soil samples that needs to be done. And then any future costs are really predicated upon the results of that assessment. So it's difficult to estimate a liability up to $1.7 million. I mean, that's the total contractual amount with this third-party vendor. So what could be reasonably estimated was $119,000, but potentially more costs in the future depending on how the results of that assessment turn out. Net pension liability, I won't belabor that. We implemented in 2015, but we present comparative financial statements. So we presented the earliest year presented, which was 2014. So it went from a $15 million liability to a $23 million liability. Why that $8 million swing, you asked? Well, investment performance was exactly it. We had great investment performance in 14 in the plan, not so much in 15, and it certainly had an impact on net pension liability. So something like that can cause a big swing on your NPL.
Could I just ask, what do you happen to know what the past return was for the past year?
All I know is the projected was 7.65. What actual was, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can get that information.
Okay.
It's in the Florida Retirement System CAPRA, which
I
is
saw something in here that said 3%. I was just curious if that was it was 2 point something, close to 3%. But is that the ballpark, or
of actual?
You can get back to me if you're not sure.
I can get back to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we having to pay, when the legislature makes us pay an increased contribution, we pay that, right?
Yes, ma'am, just like the county and the city. So a few years ago, every year the rates change, and every year, that's one of the reasons it's a little trickier for us to do the budget, because each year gets pushed out a little farther. Yes, ma'am.
But the legislators do vote for that.
Yeah, but it's all determined by the actuarials at the SBA.
I know.
They set by June 30 every year. So July 1st of each new year, you'll have the rate system in effect. But there hasn't been any dramatic swings. The most one was the employees that contributed 3%. I think that started back in 2011.
They do.
All right, thank you.
Last couple things here on passengers fares, pretty consistent year to year. Ad valorem taxes, pretty consistent. You just see some increase in the past 3 years thanks to rising property values, but the millage rate at 0.5 has been consistent since, I believe, 2011. And then operating grant revenue, capital grant revenue, pretty consistent from year to year. So no real major losses of federal state funding or nothing to be concerned about there. And then on the expense side, the biggest thing you'll see here, consistency in other operating expenses and depreciation expense.